Welcome everybody back to Veil of Sound, video interview Sunday, and we have a very interesting guest whose latest record has just been out a week ago or 2 weeks ago. We have Jesse Matthewson from KEN Mode. Jesse, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, no worries. Thanks for having me. Is it out? When is this coming out? Is this happening after the album?
Okay, so we have to start again. It will go online either the Sunday after release or the Sunday after that. So we start again. Yeah, so that are those interview partners who are not prepared.
We should include this. Come on, this is good content.
We should. Okay, we'll leave it in there. So it's like the outtakes at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's start again. Welcome everybody back to Veil of Sound. I'm very happy to have Jesse Matthewson on the show. Jesse, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. This lovely summer Thursday. It's Thursday, right? I don't even know.
It is Thursday, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jesse, what, for all those who are not as initiated or acquainted with your band, what do you do in KEN Mode?
I am the guitarist and vocalist, and I guess I'd consider myself the main songwriter in KEN Mode. Mm-hmm. At least I could say that with this latest batch of material with confidence.
So where are we catching you right now? Where are you?
I am in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, right in the middle of this giant, worthless country.
When we talk about KEN Mode, we also have to clue up the name, because is it right that there is a connection between Henry Rollins and your band name?
Very much so. It's a quote from his book, Get in the Van, that he wrote, when did he pen that? Was it 86 that it came out, or 87? He penned it while in Black Flag, but turned it into a book.
Yeah, he penned it while in Black Flag, but I'm not sure if it was released while the band was still active. So
yeah, I think it was
released.
It was definitely released after the band stopped being a thing. But yeah, it was. The reference is it's a acronym for Kill Everyone Now Mode, which was the psychological state of mind that the band had entered when they were finally able to release My War and start touring again. So a 17-year-old version of me thought that was pretty cool and that we should run with it. So we've been that ever since, for better or for worse.
For nearly 24 years right now, isn't it?
Yeah, crazy.
So the new record comes out on September 23rd. When everybody is listening and watching this, it's already out. How was the writing process for that record, Jesse?
Miserable. It was absolutely miserable. We hadn't really written anything since our previous record, Loved, came out in 2018, and I was just starting to circle the horses again in late 2019, early 2020 to start producing material again. Our bassist Scott doesn't live in the same city as us, so we have to bring him in from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is like an 8-hour drive away, or a flight. So we'd started working on material with him, and then the pandemic hit, and I threw out all of said material. So I had to start from scratch because nothing meant anything anymore. So I started learning how to produce demos on my computer here, which I'd kind of flirted with in 2007, but the environment for producing music on computers has changed significantly since then. It's considerably easier and cheaper. So that was an experiment that I really only had the luxury to attempt because of the pandemic. But it completely changed the way we can approach demoing and writing material. So a good chunk of songs.
So is it also something that you will do from now on?
Oh, 100%. It has changed the game for us. But for the NULL record, a lot of the material that ended up on it is songs that I wrote in isolation on my own. And I had to show Shane and Scott and Catherine what I'd written. So it's definitely a unique album for us in that context. 2 of the tracks I wrote with Scott, when we could finally start bringing him back to Winnipeg to work on material. And that's when we kind of kick-started the collaborative nature of how we like to write regularly, which we have a whole second record that's full of those songs.
Which hopefully will not wait another, 4 years since?
Yeah,
Love?
4. We're planning to put that one out next year.
Sounds like a good plan. So that longer period of time that it took you to get this album out is also in a huge part due to COVID, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we probably would have put something out in 2020 or maybe early 2021 if it wasn't for the pandemic. But because of the pandemic, it definitely got delayed a couple times. Like we'd started writing, even the way, with the pandemic in mind, we originally intended to record all of this in July of last year. And because of all the lockdowns, like Manitoba, specifically where we live, was still in lockdown in May of 2021. And the US US citizens weren't allowed to come up to Canada. And our producer, Andrew Schneider, lives in New York. We wanted to bring him up. And at the time, we had to make a decision, like, we have to delay this session because we can't even get him into Canada. So we moved it to the fall. And because of that, we ended up having 2 albums worth of material to record. So we beat the crap out of him when he got up here.
So you also already have that second album recorded.
Oh yeah, we recorded both at the same time. It was
very good thing.
It was a brutal fall, but yeah, we were very, very productive.
So how long did the recording sessions then take?
We spent 2 weeks recording the actual instrumentation, but I had to do all the vocals after the fact because the wildfire situation in Canada last summer had it so the atmosphere was smoky all the time and it damaged my voice. So right before the session, I blew my vocal cords out, so I couldn't record anything properly. It sounded terrible. So I recorded all the vocals throughout the fall, just barely keeping ahead of the mixing schedule. It was stressful, but at the same time, I'm glad I got the experience doing that myself too, because that's another thing that we'll continue doing going forward. Like, I'm never going to waste time doing vocals in the studio again, because I was able to spend, say, 3 different sessions on one song this record cycle because of that. So I think the vocals are the best I've ever had as a result. So I'm very excited to continue working that way in the future.
When really looking at the record, something struck me, and that was the fact that, at least to my eyes, it looked pretty unusual for a KEN Mode record, because it's very straightforward with the face. Okay, it's red glue over everything, that is clear, but the face that is very, very simplistic in a way. Was that an intention of yours?
It was simplistic, yet at the same time, it's not, because it's a unnerving older gentleman whose eyes have, the skin has grown over them.
It looks a little bit like somebody who's dead and has already paid the ferryman.
He's definitely not dead, but there's something very wrong with him. It was a visual representation of, I know, the way we were feeling and our artist friend Randy Ortiz was feeling. He was struggling a lot.
Randy has done other artworks for you as well, hasn't he?
Yes, he did the Loved record and he did Success. He's done the vinyl version of our Mennonite record. We've been working with Randy for a long, long time. But, I mean, everyone was suffering during the pandemic period where we were all locked indoors, and he definitely had his struggles with inspiration. And when he finally landed on it, he created some very cool art for the 2 albums we made.
It definitely is. I mean, like, I guess that it's a total coincidence that it looks a little bit like an older version of a guy on The Cure's Staring at the Sea cover. But I think what you just said. It looks at the same time. At one time, it looks like very calm and simple, and the next moment you realize that there is something wrong.
Yeah, very wrong.
Which is also something that I saw in some of your lyrics, but we'll come to that a little later. The record title, NULL. I guess that it's not referring to the German word for zero, is it?
Well, I mean, in a way, yes. I will literally read verbatim something that I kind of prepared to answer this, because this is how the title and the second record's title came to be, because we were really struggling with what to name the album/albums, and didn't really want to land on anything until we were closer to actually having the material itself figured out and mixed. But our bassist Scott pitched the concept of null and void, which, given the context and the community of music that were a part of it, it kind of sounds like a cliche. But at the same time, he said, just look up the definition for each word and then look at it together. And like both of those words, like it's a sort of thing that when you think about it, like we all know what it means, but at the same time, when was the last time you looked up the definition? Like we have a tendency to gloss over specific definitions over time based off of our general appreciation for the words themselves. So when I looked at it, and quite literally, it is null is amounting to nothing, having no value, having no legal or binding force. And then void is of no legal force or effect, containing nothing, not occupied or not inhabited. And then together, they are having no force, binding power, or validity. And when we did that, it was like, I mean, the general aesthetic of both records certainly comes together with those under that kind of banner, and it just made sense to us. So as much as it kind of comes across as a nihilistic or existential cliche, we felt we should just run with it, because anything else is just pretending how we're feeling.
So, but then it also, apart from the connection to the next record and from the literal defined meaning of the words, it also seems to have like a very personal meaning to you as a person and as a band. Does it connect with that status that you've already mentioned, you know, the lockdown status?
Yeah, it certainly drove home how unimportant all of us are in the grand scheme of things. And just all the horrendous things that humans were focusing on throughout the whole period. Like, I don't know, it's hard not to get down on how pointless everything is.
And how little we can do about it, right?
Yeah, seemingly. I mean, it's some of the things that we toil over should be simple things to fix, but they never will be, because people are people.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, you either destroy yourself trying or you check out on the process. And I think there's a degree of, the more I age, the more I try to check out of the process. And I know, watching a lot of material on George Carlin, like at a certain point, he definitely felt he was more of a spectator. He didn't have a horse in the game anymore. And I kind of feel like I've achieved that level of indifference way, way younger than I should.
I can get what you mean, yeah. When we talk about the music on NULL, maybe I'm wrong, but to me it sounds like the perfect condensation of everything that KEN Mode has ever stood for. Is that something that you tried, like to bring everything that you ever did into this record?
To a degree. I mean, I feel like we're exploring some territory that we haven't as much in the past on this one. I know when we put out our Venerable record, and this was over 10 years ago, that was meant to be like the perfect distillation of everything we're about. And I feel like we're always trying to achieve that, but as we grow as music listeners and general appreciators of the art, the vision itself expands. Because I know, especially for myself and Scott, like we're consumers of music. We are obsessed with music. I treat new music like a drug where I need it to exist. So we're constantly flexing new aspects of the creative side within our own minds just based on the music that we're listening to. And to have fun with this process, we have to explore new things. So I definitely feel like the newer material, we were able to explore some new territory simply because we were afforded it through the process of being in total isolation. Like a song like The Tie never would have happened if I wasn't playing around on my computer.
Yeah, likely. So when I listened to the record, I immediately had an idea because I listened to it and I had the feeling of hearing a lot of different influences on it. And so I would like to throw around an idea. Campfire, Late at Night. And we have Trent Reznor, Blixa Bargeld of Neubauten, Chris Spencer, Steve Austin, John Zorn, Henry Rollins, and FX Twin sitting around trying to out-tell the others with the best story of loss. Whose story would you like to exclude, not listen to, and whose would you want to listen to first?
I'd say if you let Buzz Osborne from the Melvins in that Campfire, I'd probably listen to him first. The rest I have no objections to whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. And so you basically have none within there where you say like, ah, no, that doesn't sound like an interesting thing.
No, I think that all sounds very interesting to me.
Is that also then some kind of like web in which you could see yourself? Like, I don't want to say the spider, but you know, as if those are fixation points for the sound of Ken Mode?
Definitely. I mean, I'd throw a couple other artists in there for sure, just in terms of what influenced specific instrumentation, but aesthetically speaking, these are definitely many of the foundation for where we grew from, and especially what we're doing now. In terms of like when we started, I know bands like Drive Like Jehu and even the Cows, Kittens, who's an old Canadian band. Bands like those really were inherently a part of our DNA. But yeah, you kind of nailed it.
So can you understand when people say that they are seeing or finding hints of those artists in your music? Because I'm pretty sure you don't sit down and say like, okay, let's write a Neubauten song.
No. But it's always interesting to me to find out where people think ideas are coming from in terms of influencing. Because I've always joked around with different interviewers when people pick out influences like, I don't know, something like Neurosis or Godflesh, and I always loop back to saying I'm literally just ripping off the Melvins. And that we never get that influence, especially from underground extreme metal media. It's always something other than the Melvins, but for me, it's always the Melvins.
Which is totally cool. I can totally get that. And I also think that you're at some point you are right, but I think that many people look at the Melvins as this band with a way too vast oeuvre. You know, like,
yeah,
which area of the Melvins are we referring to?
And I always find it fascinating because so many of the bands that are sonically compared to the Melvins, I always question, like, what the hell do these bands hear when they hear that band? Like, because like I consider them our #1 influence, and obviously we're considerably more all over the map than a lot of the bands that you normally see the Melvins getting referenced in. So, and maybe that's just telling as to the degree to which I am a fan of that band, in that the variety that they have has always been such an influence on us, and that's part of why we like approaching albums with more than one or two trains of thought, which I know that's kind of the way the music industry likes its music now, is you got to do one thing and you got to do it good, and then we're done with you. And we've never liked operating like that. We want to do a lot of different things, which makes making sets very difficult when you have some like 2-minute fast raging songs and then other 10-minute slow burns. So
would you say that it's really it's like a musical influence, or also very much an attitude influence?
I think an attitude influence as well. Yeah, very much so. I mean, yeah, it's the different things that shape you. It's always funny, particularly being a member of the extreme music community, when clearly you see peers of yours that didn't grow up on more of the punk aesthetic that, say, a band like Black Flag would instill on you. I always find that fascinating, because like we're just a bunch of weirdos trying to connect with other weirdos, and when these people who play guitar somehow think that they're above other said weirdos, I never really understand it.
Well, technically they might be, but then the question of how effective their style of playing comes into play, right?
Yeah, well, it's just, I don't know. It comes down to a headspace for me. Like, and maybe it is a degree of existentialism. Like, in the end, none of it matters anyway. You're just trying to make a connection.
Which is very French, as you said, existentialism, nihilism of the 50s and 60s. Very much Sartre. But when we talk about headspace, then we can also quickly come to the lyrics that you write. And I think there is something very Bargeldish about it, because I always loved Blixa for his highly intelligent, seemingly very simple lyrics, which then often have a twist at the end. And you very often do something like that in your songs as well. And I will just take one example from one of the newer songs, where you scream repeatedly, "I'd like to congratulate you. I'd like to congratulate you." And then all of a sudden, you give it a twist by screaming, "For buying into the exact same narrative as everyone else." I guess you want to lead people a little bit astray with the first part, right?
To a degree, although much of the album writing process for this was done differently than the previous few albums, in that a lot of what I wrote was considerably more stream of conscious in style. The last two records were considerably more collaborative, in that I keep a list on my phone here of different phrases that my band likes to throw around, just things that entertain us, concepts, word combinations that are funny and mean, and we'd construct songs out of a lot of those phrases, and I just couldn't use it this time. Given the context of the pandemic, it just didn't feel like it was a raw and real expression to me anymore. So I wanted something that felt more real, more primal in a way. So a lot of the writing, historically I do a lot of editing when it comes to putting together actual lyrics, like taking the poetry itself and then condensing it down into a lyrical format. And with what we've done with these next two records, a lot of it was literally just me sitting down and writing like a page, and that's the way the lyrics came out. So I feel it speaks to a degree of desperation that is more more honest in conveying the situation that we were all experiencing. So
Yeah, and that we are still experiencing, no
yeah,
matter what some people say.
unfortunately.
I just want to talk about two more lyrical things, and one of them is the title, "The Desperate Search for an Enemy." Do you think that enemies are important nowadays as scapegoats for a certain narrative?
They seem to be. Everyone seems to want one, and it's someone to put all of their woes on and to expose their own virtuous nature. So yeah, it's I mean, that whole song is very much a commentary on that concept, and it's clearly not a new one, but I mean, everyone, given that we get to hear everyone's opinions online, it's, I'd say, more amplified than ever as a result. So yeah, I know there's a video that was circulating last year and maybe the year before of John Cleese from Monty Python talking about all this stuff, but I think it was either in the 70s or 80s. Like, it's shit never changes. And that's why all the George Carlin comedy specials have been rising to the top again lately. And this is shit he was talking about in the 90s. Like, nothing changes.
And nowadays, those things are even more available to us because we
Yeah.
have like this huge storing machine, right?
Which, I mean, they're, to a degree, I mean, the delivery systems, it's nice that some of this art is both as vital as ever and that it's not going away. It's good for newer generations to be able to appreciate this stuff, but some of the societal problems, is just kind of sad that we just can't escape them, and we probably never will. I don't know.
So do you think that nowadays the narrative seems to be or tends to be more important than the fact?
Yeah, and I mean, so much of what we see, you have to question whether it is even true, because I feel like something just broke with the internet, where we went from a platform where ideas could be shared and scrutinized to a platform where 95% of what we see is advertisements in some way, which it's just very hard to trust anything when that's the case. Yeah, I don't know how they're going to get around that shy of intense regulation, but like, how's that even the answer?
Because who regulates the regulators, right?
Exactly.
So when we talk about the music on NULL, do I hear it correctly that you used field recordings at the very, very back of some songs, like at the beginning of Unresponsive, where I had the feeling as if I'm listening to a field recording and then the music is put on top of that?
Unresponsive is actually a funny one. It wasn't a field recording. That was a synthesizer feedback loop that I recorded. Okay. So that's a fun one. But at the end of Lost Grip, which also sounds like a field recording, that you could call a field recording, but the way we captured the drums in those big wide open sounding spots, we had Shane playing in the studio itself and then opened up 2 sets of doors into the loading dock and set up a mic out there, which the garage door then faced the street. So we were getting traffic sounds being picked up by this room mic that we were also picking up the drums. So that's, you definitely hear the traffic at the end of that song, which I thought it sounded so cool in the end that we had to keep it.
So, but basically you don't use field recordings in your songs?
No, for the most part, no. Any of the weird atmosphere you're hearing, I was creating on synthesizers.
Okay. And, you know, there are so many things flying around on the record, so many sounds, so many riffs and drum beats and whatever. But I had a feeling as if the record is pretty slim in a way. You know, it seems as if there is no fat, everything is trimmed down to perfection. And it seems as if it's like, as you already mentioned, it's kind of distilled in a way. There is no track overly long on the record. Was that something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it is partially because of the nature of how the songs were written. I demoed all this material many times over, and a lot of the song structures themselves were literally built on my computer as opposed to jammed out in a jam room. So I knew exactly how many times things were meant to be repeated. And I mean, I scrutinized this material for almost 2 years and cut things out and rewrote it. And it like a song like the debut single, A Love Letter, I think I remade that song 5 times before it became the final version that it was. So yeah, there was ample time to do rewrites over and over and over again. We probably wrote 3 times more material than we actually presented here, and I cut a lot of it simply because some ideas felt like ones we've done before on previous records. Others sounded too much like songs we'd already written in this batch of material. We very much treated these 2 albums like they were meant to be one, and no idea was going to be repeated. And then when we had to divide them up into 2 records, that created a whole new problem.
Yeah, I can imagine. When I hear those punkish elements on the record and in your songs in general, is that like a leftover of a Winnipeg punk scene?
Maybe a little. I mean, we're influenced by some of the Winnipeg noise rock scene, which, I mean, clearly the old noise rock scene of the 80s and 90s, like, you can't escape the influence that bands like Black Flag had on it anyway, and that would be where the punk comes from. We can't escape Black Flag's influence either, so it's just something that will forever be there.
Yeah. And when you talk about noise, I know that you use a lot of noise rock elements, and that is very, very well done. But I never had the feeling as if you are using them in order to make people feel uneasy.
Yes and no. I mean, we love when our riffs feel uneasy. I don't necessarily find that any of it is particularly alienating in that respect. Like, there's a lot of grind and death metal and just general extreme metal that I think takes some of those aesthetics and pushes them to an extreme where it's borderline unlistenable. And as much as we really enjoy that type of music, I don't know if we necessarily ever push it to that unlistenable space. Maybe we should. I don't know. Maybe it's too much of my classical training coming out. We always want it to be digestible in some way.
So on this record, you only had 1 guest performing outside of the 4 of you. Is that also because you and Catherine are kind of multi-instrumentalists who can do a lot on your own?
And just the choices of instruments that we worked with. Yeah, a lot of what we experimented with on this batch was synthesizers. I played around with some piano, and obviously I got Catherine to rip some more saxophone. But yeah, when you're inserting an instrument like synthesizers in with guitar, overdriven guitar and bass, like, there's really not a lot of space for anything else anyway. And it was hard enough to find space for synthesizer to begin with. We've historically, anytime I've tried to add instruments to what we do, it's always been hard because I've always approached it incorrectly. We always tried to throw in the extra instruments at the end when we were recording it in the studio, and you simply can't do that because we had a tendency to write songs where there was no space for anything else to begin with. So as soon as you tried it, I try to make up a lot of that space with what's happening in the guitar tone or the bass tone, and it would just come across as too busy or like you're just pasting on this new element for the sake of doing it. And I feel like with this material, it's the first time we've ever actually been able to write with it in mind properly and fit it in its own sonic space so it sounded right. And I mean, Andrew Schneider is an expert at mixing these things. So the way it all came together, I think, is the best we've ever approached any of these sorts of ideas.
So, one last question before we come to a little broader aspect. How important is it for you to be able to play those songs live, or to play any song live when you write them?
I know with this batch of material, when I started writing it, the idea was it wasn't important to be able to play it live. Mm-hmm. And that slowly changed over the course of actually finalizing all the material. I think there's only really one song on NULL that would be difficult to play live properly, and that's the tie, because we literally just constructed it on a computer. And I don't think Catherine could physically play the saxophone parts because I constructed loops out of her playing multiple different parts. But the rest of the album, we've pretty much worked out how you could play it live. So, and we've historically, that's always been the way we've done things, where we always intended to play it live, and anything we couldn't play live, why would you include it? But as you grow older, it's more fun to experiment with things that maybe you couldn't pull off live without like a 7-piece band or something like that. But I mean, it's easier than ever to do these things with sampler pads and stuff like that anyway. So we've been utilizing things like that for years anyway. So you might as well figure out how to play it live. Fuck it, right?
And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You can still call it an experiment.
Exactly.
As I said, I have a few questions about a broader aspect of you being Canadian, because over here in Europe, we don't hear that much about the Canadian music scene. So how do you see yourself? How do you see the Canadian music scene at the moment?
Honestly, I don't know. I know my friends.
Because you don't listen to them.
Yeah, I mean, I know my friends in the scene that are doing things, like bands like Vile Creature and Wake and Mares of Thrace, Mets. But otherwise, I largely ignore what's going on in Canadian music, because unless you're making a dent in the US, I just don't care. And I work within Canadian music. I pay attention to what's going on in metal and hardcore and punk, and that's about it, because I make my living in there, and those are the genres that generally don't get propped up by the Canadian music industry anyway. They're out there touring. They're making their name doing it that way. There's no better example than a band like Counterparts, who my brother and I work with in our management company, where like they're a big hardcore band, but the Canadian music industry for some reason just doesn't pay attention to them. And I know it irks the shit out of at least the singer. But it's funny because like even labels that we've worked with in the past, like Profound Lore, they were annoyed that Canada never really paid attention. Meanwhile, they've made an international mark. Canada's funny that way. Always will be. So
can you give us any other like Winnipeg or Manitoba bands that we should check out?
Winnipeg, you should check out Tunic, who's a band again that I work with, and they're on the same label as us, Artifact Records. In terms of like noisy, annoying music, they're one of the best to come out in the last 10 years. It'll be interesting to see what kinds of bands spawn from the pandemic age of being locked away. I've heard there's a new batch of like 18 to 21-year-olds that are starting to create music. So I'm very curious to see as they start to kind of really make their mark, because I know they're really in the beginning stages of like playing live and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm very curious to see where things lead, because I specifically with Winnipeg have noted that there was kind of a void in the last 5 years where there just wasn't a lot of new, exciting music coming out. The only people doing anything had been at it for 20 bloody years, which you need young people doing it. Otherwise, the scene dies.
Yeah, you
I'm
need to infuse
40
new
now.
blood, right?
Yeah, I'm 40. I can't be the one that's doing new, exciting things. Come on.
Yeah, but you look 24.
Oh, thank you. You're too kind. Here, I'll wrinkle my face a little more so I.
So those were our regular questions, and now we have to go through we will go through our infamous quickfire round. You get two alternatives, and you have to choose.
Okay.
Let's start with something simple: Venom or Bathory.
Bathory.
Merzbow or KK Null.
KK Null.
Okay. I would have expected you to say Merzbow. If you want to, you can also give short explanations for your choice.
I'm gonna say KK Null. KK Null simply because fucking Zanigiva, man.
Yeah. Okay. John Cage versus John Cale.
Cage.
Voivod versus Rush.
Voivod, undoubtedly.
Winnipeg Blue Bombers versus the Winnipeg Jets.
I'd have to go with Jets because I've never given a shit about football.
Scratch Acid or Acid Bath?
Scratch Acid, undoubtedly.
T-shirt colors, black or colored?
Black. Heavy metal.
AmRep Records or SST?
AmRep, I think I'd have to go with.
Okay. You sound as if you're a little undecided on that one.
I mean, SST is obviously very important, but like AmRep put out. I'll have to choose AmRep simply because AmRep put out Today Is the Day's Willpower, which is, for me, one of the greatest records of all time.
And SST put out Black Flag.
They did, but I feel like Willpower is a better record than anything Black Flag put out.
Don't let Henry hear that.
Black Flag is clearly like one of the most important bands in my musical life, but I feel like no single record of theirs was like perfect, you know? And I don't feel like there are many records that like in my world are perfect, but Willpower is one of them. Face of Collapse by Dazzling Killman's another. Like,
okay, let's go on. Billy Talent versus Alexis on Fire.
ugh. I guess I'd pick Alexis on Fire. Don't particularly care about either.
Can imagine. Writing and recording versus touring.
Writing and recording.
Okay.
Way more enjoyable for me.
Houdini versus Stoner Witch.
That's a tough one. I might have to go with Houdini just because of Honey Bucket.
Okay. Understandable.
But in terms of like album writing, Stoner Witch is.
Would you consider that for you a perfect record?
It's one of them. I don't know what I'd consider a perfect record for the Melvins. If Bullhead had like Atlantic money behind it, can you imagine how amazing that one would be?
Yeah.
Because Bullhead's the production aside, that is a perfect Melvins record.
That's true. But the production is pretty shitty.
Yeah.
Last one. The Weaker Vans or Propagandy?
Propagandy. Easy.
I knew it.
Especially since when Todd joined that band, they just kept getting better and better. Yeah, what did they call themselves? Progressive thrash or something like that?
Yeah, they say that about themselves. And I mean, like, nothing against John and the work that he does with Weaker Vans, but I would also always choose Propagandy.
Yeah, I never really liked his voice, so whenever he sang in Propagandy, it always bugged me. And as they got more and more metal, I liked them more and more. So yeah, like I think Failed States is a high watermark for them.
Definitely, and it's also I think in general a high watermark for punk in general, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it shows
100%.
where punk could also go.
Yeah.
So Jesse, thanks for taking your time. Thanks for being on the show, and for everybody who has not yet heard NULL, please do
Go
so
listen.
as soon as you hear this.
And go order it if you like it. Physical product.
Yes.
Help
Minimum
us.
2 versions.
Yep. We've got those
Jesse,
minimum.
thanks for taking your time.
Thank you for having me. And again, I'm sorry I was late.
No problem.